Thank you so much, Douglas, for that inspiring speech. Now, Douglas has to go for his train soon, so we're going to try and whip through some questions. If we make your questions short, then more people will be able to get in. So who would like to ask Douglas a question? Right, gentlemen, I believe you're going to ask tough questions, but we don't mind that in UKIP. So ask your question if you can speak up so we can hear you.
What about French vodka?
French vodka, right. That's not the question.
No. I'll try and be quick. You said in the manifesto we need to be tough on so-called health tourism. I thought it was interesting the language so-called, because I would have used that as well, so-called health tourism. It says it spends up to 2 billion. This was from, I think, a headline from either the Daily Hate Mail or the Daily Express, one of the UKIP, for £1 million now, I think. But the figures I looked at is that most of these would be eligible for free care because they're temporary migrants, such as students and seasonal workers. So it's not nearly as much as what you're saying. It would be actually around £12 million, which is 0.01% of the health budget.
Right.
And the question also living returning home, which costs 7 million.
Right. Okay.
That's only 0.06%.
All right. Thank you.
So we got the gist.
Okay. I have a feeling, sir, that you may have made up your mind as to how you're going to vote or not vote, but for the benefit of people who are open-minded, I think it's really important that we do address the issue of health tourism. Now, we need to make sure that our National Health Service is a national health service and not an international health service. Now, the scale of the problem is, as you point out, it's quite difficult to quantify. Some estimates put it at 2 billion. Some estimates I've seen put it at 500 million. But I think it's right and proper that we have a system of healthcare that means that people who might choose to fly into the country with no previous connection in the country, who are not British nationals, not British residents, who have never been here before, if they fly in specifically to access healthcare that they're not entitled to, I think that's wrong. And I think most reasonable people would think that that was wrong. In fact, I noticed that even Ed Miliband said yesterday that we would have to reclaim the money from them. Those were his precise words. But I think the way to make sure that we do this, and a really good way of doing it, would be to have a system of effective border control. I don't think we do have a system of effective border control in this country, and I think one of the reasons is we don't have enough staff working for the UK Border Agency. I think there are all sorts of things we could do to make sure we have proper controls over our borders. And if we had an Australian-type points-based immigration system, and if we weren't in the European Union, I think we could have proper border controls and a national health service that was free at the point of use for people entitled to use it. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable and sensible position to take in a manifesto. And I think attempts to sort of vilify it or demonise it, well, I'm afraid I disagree.
A little pace here, gentleman in the fourth row.
The mental health affects 20% of people in society. A few days ago, the Conservative candidate for this city said that she would like to see people with mental health issues wear wristbands. What would UKIP's policy be on improving mental health facilities, as the current service is a disgrace for many people throughout the country? Thank you.
In Peel Ward, in my constituency, there are one of the highest number of people with mental health issues anywhere in the country. And they're not just statistics to me, a lot of them are people I know by name. I think we've let a lot of people with mental health problems down in this country over the years. And I think there's a lot more we need to do. And UKIP has got in its manifesto proposals specifically to invest more money in mental health services. I work with a local charity in Clacton, and they tell me that quite often, not always, but quite often people with mental health issues also have dependency issues, and I think there's more we could do to make sure that we address those problems too. I think the idea of stigmatising people with mental health, of making people somehow wear a wristband, it's obnoxious, it's offensive, it's deeply distasteful. I think we need to remove some of the stigma attached to mental health, show much more respect to people with mental health, and make sure that we address mental health and tackle mental health care properly.
How will you do it though? That's what I'm asking. It's all very well to say that, but how?
All right, well, I'll answer that quickly. We want to get through some more questions because Douglas has to go very shortly. But, our manifesto is the one that's got a fully costed plan to give more resources to the NHS, because we've shown where we would save the money from other budgets, whether you agree with that or not. So by the end of the next Parliament, we would be spending £3 billion a year more on the National Health Service, and that would provide thousands of more doctors, nurses, midwives, and obviously it would be up to a much more locally accountable National Health Service under our plans to prioritise the spending between different clinical needs. One thing we'd also do is make sure there was a trained counsellor on hand at every food bank to deal with people, and provide extra support for people whose needs are more complex than just not being able to afford to sort of pay for their weekly food budget. We do agree that it's been a bit of a Cinderella service in the NHS, and I think particularly youth mental health services. And very many of us in this audience will have known young people just reaching adulthood who've had mental health issues, and I think across the country, my impression is that that's a sector which has been particularly badly organised and underfunded. So in that sense, I can say for almost the first time probably last night, I agree with Nick, because I think Nick Cleggers has made points about that. But you've already had turns up. We'll have another Q&A later, okay? And you can ask again. There's a gentleman further back there. You've got a question?
Democracy.
It's not your meeting. If you want to hire a hall and have your own meeting and see if you can draw a crowd as Douglas had, then I invite you to do that. Now, gentlemen, a bit further back.
Thank you. I will say who I am, because it's probably worthwhile. My name's Kevin Price. I'm one of Labour's councillors in the ward in which you're holding your meeting. Mr. Carswell, you talked about career politicians and you talked about electoral reform earlier. Interesting that I don't recall you ever mentioning electoral reform whilst you were a member of the elected representative of the Conservative Party.
Can I come back on that? Can I come back on that?
Small party.
Sir, with respect, I know you want to make negative points about me because you're Labour and being tribal, but I write a blog every day, and one of the wonderful things about writing a blog is it gives you a record of precisely what you thought about different issues. And if you go back and check my blog entries in November 2008, 2009, 2010, you will find me arguing pretty consistently for far-reaching political reform, including single transferable vote and AV+. And I pretty consistently argued for electoral reform. You're talking to the one former Conservative MP who's got a record of advocating electoral reform.
I've got the scarlet red shirt, but there'll be another Q&A, and if you've got another question, you can ask that later. Gentlemen, that side.
National health and people coming from foreign countries to use it. If people definitely need the help in that, I can't see the problem with financing it. Take it from the foreign aid budget, then everybody gains. Why don't take it from the foreign aid budget and reimburse the national health?
Health insurance, like we do when we travel.
But, that's
Clearly, if someone's in this country and they need emergency health care, you can't have a system where they don't get it. And of course, under UKIP's proposals, as outlined in the manifesto, we would make allowance for that. But I think the principle of making sure that if someone's going to move from one country to this country, I think it's reasonable to make sure that people are not coming here expressly and specifically to access our national health service.
I totally agree with that. What I'm saying is about the situation where you have to treat people and then use the overseas money to do it.
It's a national health service, it's not an international health
The next
service.
question, so I'm sort of somewhat torn, but we'll ask the gentleman.
Twin Gallant from Newmarket. You rightly mentioned the silly military adventurism of the previous two governments of abroad. What do you think UKIP's policy should be should Argentina reinvade the Falklands?
Well, I mean, quite clearly, if Argentina was to invade the Falklands, we would have no option but to defend British territory. We simply could not tolerate that sort of aggression. But, you know, I think the best way of making sure that that never happens is making sure that people realise that we've got the means to defend ourselves. I understand that a while ago the government was briefing that they were reinforcing the Falkland Islands. I don't know if it's true, but I heard that that amounted to sending a single helicopter. We had, at the outbreak of the first Iraq war, 19 squadrons. Yeah, 19 squadrons. We now have 7. When we talk about whether or not we should take military action against ISIS, with what do we plan to take military action? What is there? Now, I really do think that defence is important. And I think one of the reasons why we live in a free country and a free world is precisely because we're prepared to invest in our defence, and we're prepared to make sure that we're safe. And I look at some of the threats around the world, and I think both governments have disgracefully underfunded and under-resourced our armed forces. Now, I'm not in favour of militarism. I refuse to back David Cameron's proposal to bomb Libya. Look at the consequences of that military intervention. I think it was a disaster. But much as though I'm reluctant to commit British forces overseas, I think you've got to have British forces that you can commit should you need to.
Thomas has to go for his train now. There will be more Q&As and obviously more speeches to come. I'd just like to say, Douglas, thank you. Fantastic.
Cheerio.